Hello everyone, you're listening to Northern Flights, a Park Pro podcast keeping you up to date with the people, tournaments, and culture of disc golf in Canada and beyond. Consider becoming a Patreon today at patreon.com/parkpro. Find us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode is brought to you by DiscGolfPark. And now your hosts, Andre, Jesse, and Matt.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good time of day, wherever it is you are. It's us. It's Northern Flights. We're back. We're missing an Andre, though, but we've got a Jesse in effect.
Yes, two-man crew tonight. And some exciting stuff to go over and a really exciting interview coming down the pipe. Really exciting.
We have the ultimate disc physics nerd interview for you guys. If you are at all interested in the nuances of disc flight, it's not an airplane wing, it's not a golf ball, it's not a flying gyroscope, it's kind of something in between all three of those things, and we have an expert that's going to explain that all to you. That was a fun interview, wasn't it?
It was a super exciting interview. We got to get nerdy about discs for a little bit, kind of dive into what makes what happen, and have a really interesting talk with a dude that's one step short of being legally allowed to call himself Dr. Disc Golf.
Yeah. And turns out a pretty good player, too.
Yeah, and a great disc golfer. I followed his Instagram after, and the guy can throw the circle very well.
You know what they say? Know the circle, throw the circle. Am I right? I've never heard that before in my life.
You just might have got the title for the podcast.
All right, editor, you got that? You got that? All right. So, hey, listen, some people played disc golf this week, Jesse. What do you know? What do you see? What do you hear?
Yeah, let's dive right into some tournament action. It was the Discmania 303 Open, a Q Series event at Beaver Ranch. Not at the typical 303 Open course this year, but...
They've got a ranch for beavers now?
Well, it's a memorable name. I haven't seen any beavers in the pictures, but it's a really nice woods course, kind of mountainy, more similar to what we have here than anything else you'd see on tour typically.
I guess if you were going to have a ranch for beavers, it would have a lot of trees.
Yeah.
Also, how do you hold in beavers and you can't use wooden fence posts?
I mean, it's chain link or die, baby.
Anyway, who played Max? Max Regetnig?
Yeah.
Co-host?
Yeah, our friend Max played. Anyway, it was an off week of actual DGPT events in North America as the Euro Tour event in Copenhagen was going down. So a lot of the American talent decided to come here. Stackfield and our boy Max came in tied 9th with former Discmania teammate Paul Kranz, who was the young gun that they picked up after his, U.S. amateur win, I believe.
I think so.
Anyway, that
nice.
Scored him $475, and I don't know how the Q Series works well enough to know if that gets him points or anything that goes towards an actual DGPT thing, but the event paid down to 34th, and it was a stacked field of 83, so some could say his best finish in a long time. Just one short of Colton Montgomery, and at the top, Aaron Gossage. The Goose took her down, 24 down, with not too many notable names, but I do recognize Harry Chase and Joe Revere, the old man from Colorado.
Yeah.
So,
wow, well done, Max. Top 10.
Yeah, top 10. Money in his pocket. Got to be points for something on the FPO side. Holly Finley took it down by 8 strokes over Erica Weir. And it's not worth our time to look any further because we've got so much more exciting stuff to look at still.
Because we have a star in the making, Jesse.
Yeah, I wanted to save that for last, but since we're here...
Well, no, I'm talking about Evelina Salonen.
Okay,
is that what you got next?
Open. That's what we got next. Yes, yeah. Evelina Salonen, second one of the year, right?
Yeah. And no, third, I think. Third of the year, isn't it? She won the major, and she won one early in the year.
Yeah. What a year she's having. It's the Evelina we all wanted to see, and the fact that it's happening over and over again now means it's not a fluke. She's here, and I'm so excited to see how she closes out this season.
And it's the Evelina that we have seen. It's not just like this mystical Evelina that's never existed. This was Evelina from a few years ago, right? before she like developed a case of the yips. She's been
Yeah.
a crusher, forehand and backhand, and a super accurate thrower for years and years.
Yeah.
But the
And-
putting just, whoop.
Yeah. Such an athlete, but that goes to show you the mental game is a big part of the game of golf, whether it's ball, frisbee, or otherwise. If you can't be there in the moment, holy smokes, it suddenly feels impossible.
9 strokes down in the final round to winning in a playoff, and having to make long putts to make the playoff happen, and then to win the playoff too.
Conquering all her demons. I loved it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. If I could watch her and Hannah Blomroos, both of them just throw, I would just watch the two of them play 18 holes any day of the week.
Yeah, it's crazy. They must play together when they practice because they both seem to push each other in all the same ways. You know, the throwing skill, the distance, and sometimes the putting, challenging each other top and bottom on that one. Unfortunately,
Yeah, it's like a game of reverse horse out there sometimes. But
yeah. Oh goodness, nothing like reverse horse on the putting green.
yeah. So that was
keep you up at night.
that was played at Valbparen, which is in Copenhagen, and it's right in Copenhagen. I've played it before. It is a beautiful park course, huge park, and I played it. I got all excited because I checked my UDisc and I was like, "Oh, I went one down at that place. I must have had a good round." And then I checked; it was a totally different layout.
Yeah, I heard that.
But it's like the Baker
Jota
Park.
Jensen was talking about it, actually. How he's played the course millions of times, and he shows up, and the holes are different, so he didn't feel like he was as practiced as everybody was letting on.
Right. It's like the Baker Park or Rundle Park or what's the big park course, I guess, downtown Vancouver.
Like a Queenie, Raptors Knoll, whatever the busy ones are.
Yeah, Toronto Island maybe. Like whatever your park course in the middle of a huge metropolis is, like that's what it was. And I thought that was super cool.
In the city.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. It looked beautiful. I didn't watch the tournament yet. I've only seen snippets. But the clips, it looks so manicured and well taken care of. Like, what a beautiful piece of property.
Yeah, it's not like a botanical garden, but it's as close as a public park gets to a botanical garden.
MPO side, Jesse wins again.
Jesse always wins.
Yeah, I would guess Jesse Nieminen took it down by 2. And again, you're going to have to fill me in because I didn't watch this tournament yet. But I did see a headline where he said he was happy to finish it and that he felt like he always choked these by 1 or 2. And it was such a relief to finally get the monkey off his back and take one down.
Yes. From the couple of times I've seen him on the Euro Tour, the Finnish Tour, he is one of those guys that's at or near the lead card. And just like when the final day or so kicks around, he's just like, bye. You're going to go miss a bunch of putts and throw a B. And so you always like to see those guys win.
Second place, a tie between, can you try the first one for me?
Was it A2? I don't have the scores up in front of me.
Is it EETU?
Yeah, A2, I think.
I was going to say E2, and that would be rude to get it wrong.
Tuominen. Yeah.
And actually, looking down this list, the top 10 is very in the hunt for this tournament. And the top 4 or 5 are only separated by 3 strokes.
Yeah, exciting finish in Copenhagen. Bodes well for the rest of the European swing for the Pro Tour for sure.
I just like the consistency. You see these American tournaments, and sometimes people blow them out. It shows a really competitive field. And you look at the ratings; they're all super highly rated players, assumedly playing right to their potential.
I think like
they could
every year
drop
there's
into the
2
tour.
more Finnish stars, it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because it was like Seppo Paju and Vaino Mäkelä, and then you get maybe a couple more, and then all of a sudden it's like they're multiplying like bunnies over there.
Yeah, I think the respect that Finland gives it as a sport allows a lot of young people to pursue it harder, and the proof is in the pudding, as they say. They've got a huge rosters of great young players.
Yeah.
Paul Ulibarri was the other storyline for this tournament.
Yeah, he had a chance for his first win in who knows how long.
Yeah, they said it was like 13 years, I think.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have seen that.
That would have been pretty cool.
And he still played good golf. He lost it in the end a little bit, throwing his worst round.
Yep.
1046, 1046, 1022 as a 1024 rated player is a great performance.
Yep. It's hard to say you choke when your final round is pretty close to your rating.
Yeah, you played great, and on target.
Yeah. But the most important story of the weekend, I would say, Las Vegas Challenge. We hinted at it.
Yes.
What an exciting weekend in FPO. Sophia Doucette was in the lead after round 1, was in the lead after round 2. And she got caught in the final round by Luca Lorenz. And what are you doing in North America, Lucky? Everybody's over in Europe. Why are you taking our wins away?
Yeah, there's like 2 Americans in Copenhagen. And then the one European that stayed behind takes away the Las Vegas Challenge title.
They took her gerbs. But, man, I think a lot of people found out about Sophia. It wasn't on the Pro Tour this year, but it was still like a well participated A tier, right?
And still like a heavily Innova supported event. So they still pulled out all the stops, had the pros, the signing booths, the vendors, the whole shebang. It was still Las Vegas Challenge for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
And honestly, even other than the year it was a DGPT event, this has been an A tier in the past. And it's almost as well attended now as it was as an A tier then. So it's not like it was a giant,
Also,
chop off and this tournament's going to die.
We've got one of the funniest histories in disc golf, which is a sport that we take very seriously now. And it's, there's good money in it. There's rules. You got to wear a collared shirt. And 5 years ago, what was this tournament called, Jesse?
The Gentleman's Club Challenge.
The Gentleman's Club Challenge. And the signature disc
had
had
strippers. Times are changing.
Yeah. You know what? I had a chance to buy a bunch of like Gentleman's Club Challenge destroyers, and I never took it up, and I really regret it. I would love to have a Gentleman's Club Challenge destroyer.
So funny now.
It was not long ago. I think 5 years ago.
It's just so disc golf and so America to me to have that as your like logo and name and everything.
Well, it's not a strip club. Strip clubs are vile, and gentlemen's clubs are, that's where gentlemen hang out, obviously.
Naturally. Oh.
But how cool is that? Like, we know how good Sophia is, and she's played down at a couple of tournaments. She went down to Memorial, I think, and showed well. But this was like, hello, Sophia's here, and bring your best arms, and she's gonna outplay most of them.
Oh yeah, she still took down a half a dozen tour players with that win, or with that second place, and like you said, she had her till the last round. And it's great publicity for her. I'm hoping it gets her more support from Innova, and I think it will, because honestly, I think they treated her fantastic. It grew my respect for Innova, seeing how much time they got her in front of the camera, the interviews, the publicity, putting her name out there. They could have treated her like she was the girl that came down from Canada, but instead they treated her like a star, and I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I hope the support continues and that Sophia plays a lot more, because that win is just coming down the pipe. You could tell those first few rounds. Holy smokes.
If I'm Innova, like, why wouldn't you do everything you could to get her on the tour full time?
Yeah. And you know what? I'm hoping that's happening, because she's at OTB right now. And I saw a Jennifer Allen Instagram post saying that she was practicing with Sophia all week, I think, or playing with her all week and playing practice rounds with her. So that's a connection that must have been made probably from that event right there.
That was a connection that was made a while ago. So Jen played a tournament with Sophia, I think, in one of Sophia's like first year of playing or something like that. Andre and I talked to Jen Allen and I forget the other guy's name on PDGA radio last year. And then so they asked us who some of the up and coming stars of Canada were, and we said Sophia Doucette was one of them. And Jen said, "Oh yeah, I played with her. She can crush." And we were like, "Yeah, she sure can."
That's cool. Yeah. I love that.
So, but yeah, I assume she got to meet more of the Innova team down there. And yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think they would have seen the star and hopefully supported her. Anyway,
And so many of their FPO players are like 40 plus nowadays.
Oh yeah, I think Sophia has the potential to be, one of the best. You can see that she's a natural thrower, and she hasn't been playing for long enough to have the experience against a lot of these other players that have been playing for 12 years yet. The calmness of that tournament, the pressure, the stuff like that, you learn those with time. You can't just study them in a book or go out in the field and do it 100 times. You got to put yourself there, and she's doing it, and she'll be able to overcome all that stuff, no problem.
And I think my favorite part was she had her rough holes at the start of the third round and then got stronger as the third round went on. To me, that's promising. It wasn't like this downward spiral of a round. It was she had some probably nervy holes for the front nine in the final round being in the lead of an A tier, and that's going to happen. And that's, like you said, that's just the experience of playing a bunch of tournaments, right? But she still pulled through and had a really solid finish in the back nine. So to me, that's the most promising thing.
Absolutely, she did. She did. When you look at that scorecard, it's like the classic tale of two nines, but to the max. I think she'd be probably close to 7 up on the front or something like that.
Yeah.
And then 4 under or something on the back. Don't quote me on any of those numbers. I haven't looked at that scorecard for a few days, but it's very, very impressive anyway.
Yeah.
And in MPO, Connor Rock, absolutely shredding, throwing a 1073 and a 1080 and a lowest round of 1037. Beating Gannon Burr by 1.
Yeah, that's a bananas finish.
Also threw 2 rounds in the 1080s to start the tournament.
Yeah.
Wow. 10-12 rated player, probably his career best performance. What a night in Vegas for him.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure he passed the Gentleman's Club challenge.
Yeah, he very well may have.
He's probably one of those young kids from Kansas that went home to a study group after. Listen, we've got a great interview, like we said, but we're going to do a new segment we just introduced a couple of weeks ago. It's back. It is Dan's Rule of the Week.
It's Dan's Rule of the Week. It's Dan's Rule of the Week.
Boom. And this week we are looking at 813.01 illegal disc.
Illegal discs.
What makes a golf disc legal for play or not?
Dimples. Right? Am I right?
Yes, dimples. Matt and I were talking about all of our weird discs that somehow managed to stay approved, and there are some fun ones in both of our collections that we should have a disc segment where we talk about old fun things, but
yeah,
that's something for another day.
So you're telling me there's such a thing as an illegal disc?
Yes, an illegal disc. As described by the PDGA, discs used in play must be approved by the PDGA and meet all of the conditions set forth in the PDGA technical standards. For a list of the approved discs, click this link. I'm definitely not just reading the page. If you do click that link and you do check this rule out, you can search up any weird molds you might have. And if they show up, they're legal. If they don't show up, they're not on the approved list.
This is one of my favorite pages to look at anytime a manufacturer releases a new disc. And you're like, I wonder if that's just a rebranded version of this old mold they had. And you can actually go and find the approval specifications. Any of the newer ones in the last 10 or 15 years have photos of the prototypes that people sent in as well. So you can actually see what the thing looks like. And they basically have like full caliper measurements of all of these discs. So the height, the rim width, the diameter of the disc, and then the angle of both the upper part of the flight plate and the lower part of the flight plate. So anyway, so there is a database of legal discs, but what makes a disc legal? Can I throw an arrow bee with the big hole, just like the ring?
Well, if we do explore these technical standards, the flight plate cannot have holes in it. Must be continuous the whole way. The rim cannot have a break in it, if I remember correctly.
I think that's right, yeah.
And there's some measurements that dictate the angle and ratio of the rim depth. And we were discussing it before. It doesn't tell you explicitly why, but we're assuming that discs that are too thin and long would be very sharp and dangerous.
So we've got a set of standards set out by the PDGA for manufacturing discs. Then you submit a prototype to the PDGA, right? And then they approve or deny it, and they'll send you an email, say this is approved, and then you get to stamp a PDGA approved. So then everything that says PDGA approved should be totally 100% legal, right, Jesse?
Well, I think we've seen that technical standards have changed and some things might not be legal anymore. And now that you've said that like that, I also think that the PDGA approved stamping happens in-house. So there might be some things that get pushed through early. Prototypes, maybe. Sneak their way in. That's another mystery for another day as well.
So we did discover that some discs get approved and then get unapproved. And so just because it says PDGA approved on it doesn't mean it's a PDGA legal disc necessarily. If you have any questions, and I think it's mostly just the turbo putt and anything with a super weird shape. And even some of the super weird shapes are still legal.
Yeah, for some that we looked up, they're pretty lenient, actually. But I don't know, gimmick discs, definitely. Look them up if you're going to use them in a serious tournament. I'm sure it'll sneak by your local C tier. But yeah, don't bring them out on tour, for sure.
Yeah. So I've got my discs. What happens if a chunk breaks out of my disc? What can I do to that disc and make it still legal?
Funny you should ask.
Can I grind it from a T-bird to an eagle? Can I affect the actual shape of the disc to more easily replicate a different disc?
No, you cannot.
What?
Yeah, basically what it says is that you need to keep your disc as intended. You're still allowed to repair it, sand off imperfections, bumps, and knocked out pieces from hitting trees, or even the flashing as it came from the manufacturer, because that's not an intended piece from the manufacturer. One thing it doesn't cover that I see a lot of players do is the little lighter trick, but I bet you that would sneak by as well. And you're allowed to mark your disc, obviously, and dye it and change the colors and things because it doesn't affect the actual shape of the disc. But affecting the shape of the disc in any way seems to be a big no-no with them, whether it's additive or negative processes. You can't paint your disc, add a film of anything, put a decal on it, anything like that. And if you do decide to go the other way, no, you can't engrave it, etch it. I was thinking about all the ways of making a mark of non-detectable thickness when people write their name and phone number on the rim. If you could engrave yours in there so those buggers with the acetone can't steal your discs off the course. But that put this to rest, and I guess I'm not allowed to do that.
So, and is somebody else's disc legal? Like can I put out with your disc? Is that legal? It's not my disc, it's your disc. Can I legally play with somebody else's discs?
This one I don't know, and this happens at tournaments all the time, and I just be quiet. We found the rule that I'm too scared to call because people borrow putters all the time from each other out of the basket.
Sure.
And do you have the answer to this one?
Yeah. There's no limit to the number of discs you can play with, and I think it's if the person's finished out their hole, and I assume you've asked permission. I don't know if that's just friendly or actually mandatory, but it's common courtesy at least to ask somebody if you can putt out with their disc. But you can putt out with somebody's disc if they've already finished the hole. Obviously, you can't touch somebody's disc while they're in the middle of playing the hole, but you can putt out with somebody else's disc. You can, if you throw all your discs into a lake, you can run back to your car within 30 seconds and grab a whole new bag of discs. You can send a caddy back to your car to grab a whole bunch more discs for you. You can go to a disc golf store on the golf course. At Memorial, they have a disc golf retailer at the course. You can go buy a new disc and play with it that round.
I want to see the receipts on that one, buddy, because I had always heard the opposite.
Yeah.
The whole time playing, I heard you could not add discs to your bag once you commence playing the round.
No, there's no rule about that.
Oh, we're finding this. Battle time, nerd search.
Okay, we looked it up. What'd you find?
I was wrong. It's in the PDGA Q&A. If you look it up, it's Q&A number 3, and they say if you left, say, your favorite putter in the car, can someone run and go get it for you, even in the middle of the round? And the first thing it says, yes, you are allowed to add discs to your bag after the round has started. And I didn't need to read any further.
Yeah, so this is one of those like really commonly misunderstood rules. I heard that too. I bought a disc during a round at Lost Egg one time, and somebody was like, "Well, you can't use that now. You have to wait till after the round."
Maybe it's an Alberta old head thing, and maybe that's where I heard it.
Could be. So, disc is PDGA approved. Just like currently PDGA approved. Hasn't been scuffed up. Nothing's affecting the flight of the disc. You haven't added anything to it. You haven't subtracted anything of note to it. Anything else about legal discs?
Well, there's the one caveat. If it's dark or snowy, the PDGA tournament director can allow people to use attached lights. So that's an additive process, but you don't have to have a glow disc.
You can have a PDGA approved glow round?
When night or snow play has been announced by the director, players are allowed to add material or device to assist in finding the disc.
Wow.
I didn't know that was a thing.
What if my device is a way better disc golfer?
You have a distraction every time.
I've got a Max Forget Nega attached to my disc at all times.
Yeah. So here's one for you. And I would love to use this as like a snake move to win a tournament sometime. I play like a good guy, but I got a whole snake 18 in the back of my head if I had to be bad. A disc that is questioned by another player or an official is illegal unless it is subsequently approved by the director. So if I ask, is that disc legal?
It's not legal.
It's immediately illegal until it's approved by the TD.
Dang.
So if it's hole 6 and you don't like the guy, find his favorite putting putter. Say, is that disc legal?
First of all, grab your phone, open up the rule book onto the PDGA app, have it ready in his face.
Have the guy ready to have a tantrum at you.
Yeah.
Deserve the tantrum at you because you're a dink.
The best time to do it would be you make a putt and then he's about to putt.
Yeah, you big putt somebody around the circle's edge and then show them that. Some poor guy with a buzz lining up his 35-footer.
Okay.
That would be funny.
Good to know.
And then this one rounds out with all discs used in play except mini marker discs must be identifiably marked. Player receives a warning for this for the first throw of an unmarked disc. Player receives 1 penalty throw for each subsequent throw of an unmarked disc.
So when they say put your name and phone number on a disc, partly that's because we have a system of honors where you return discs that you found. You do your best to get them back to the rightful owner, and people will do the same for yours. But there's another reason for that.
Yeah, no penalties.
So, I mean, I recommend putting your phone number on your discs for both of those reasons. It's like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So that's been Dan's rule of the week. Rule of the week. And now, the main course, the entree, the pièce de résistance. Jesse, we grabbed a guy from the U.S. So we talked about this in the winter because we had a question about why our discs don't fly as far in the winter. It's a thing we've all noticed, anybody that lives around winter. And then we started speculating, well, it must have to do with the wind or the air density or something like that. And then we got corrected by Maddie, I believe. And then we were like, well, this doesn't make any sense then. So maybe we should find a physicist, an aeronautics engineer.
And this is a conversation that you had with Andre that I had never known the full story of until just now. I just thought we interviewed a really cool physics dude, and you happen to know that thing about the air density from a time you guys were sitting down talking.
Oh, were you not there for that episode?
No.
Oh.
No, that's when you guys interviewed Maddie, I wasn't there.
Okay. So, yeah. So
it was doubly exciting for me because I guess I get to learn the backstory and all the science behind it.
Yeah, we just assumed it was like going to a higher elevation. That the wind, the air density was the same as going to a higher elevation, so all your discs are more overstable, and therefore they don't generally fly as far. So, I emailed, I'm going to say a half dozen engineers and physicists, including a guy that wrote a paper on computational fluid dynamics, AI optimized disc shapes. I emailed him twice because I thought he'd be the greatest guest ever. Never got back to me. I emailed several people at several universities, and nobody wanted to take up the challenge of explaining how discs work.
Until
one of the 2 YouTube videos that came out recently about people making disc making robots or disc shooting robots. There was a guy in the comment section that said, "Hey, I did my master's thesis on the flight of golf discs." And so I looked him up from his YouTube profile and I found him on Instagram and I reached out and I asked him to come on the podcast and he said yes.
Yeah, and what a find! Because I keep saying what a conversation. Because it was so cool to have a change of pace on our conversations, get a little technical for a while, and he was the man with the answers for me. These are things that I've puzzled around in disc golf for 5, 6, 7 years now, and he was using wind tunnels to figure it out. Yeah, I won't spoil much more, but
yeah. So our conversation with Mac Givens out of Alabama is coming up. And this conversation is brought to you by DiscGolfPark. DiscGolfPark is a unique disc golf course concept developed in Finland in 2005. It's based on the idea of building sports facilities in an environmentally friendly way. Disc Golf Park provides great experiences for players of all skill levels, from beginners to professionals. Their main ideology is to introduce disc golf to new audiences. There are several options to suit any kind of course, and all official disc golf parks include professional and safe course design, disc golf park pro targets, tee pads and tee signs, and an info board to welcome new players to your course. You always need those info boards, Jesse. You know what I mean? You show up to a disc golf course, you don't know it's a disc golf course. What are you going to do?
honestly, the info board is killer.
Yeah.
There's players that don't have UDisc, new players. It's the best way to onboard people. You see the map, you never have to go. Take a picture with your phone.
Of it.
Yeah,
I've got so many maps of disc golf courses on my phone.
foolproof.
Yeah. The Disc Golf Park World concept consists of multiple courses designed for different types of players. Multi-golf is a new, fun activity for the whole family. In multi-golf, 3 forms of golf are played: foot golf, park-style pitch and putt, and of course, our favorite, disc golf. School Disc Golf Park offers students a new and exciting form of exercise for the physical education classes. A course suitable for schools can be designed even in a small area, for instance, in a schoolyard. Furthermore, the costs of a school disc golf park are lower than those of the regular disc golf parks. Disc Golf Park offers private and group lessons or clinics. For more information, check out the website at discgolfpark.com and request a quote today. Here it is, our chat with Mac Givens. That's right. Joining us today, we have a very special guest all the way from Mobile, Alabama. He is a professional disc golfer, 989 rated. He is sponsored by Finish Line Discs and Infinite Discs and Tomahawk Dies and Discura DG. He has played in the College Disc Golf Championships, as you can see on his shirt. And there's a reason why we've got him on the podcast. Please welcome Mac Givens.
Woo, golf claps. Hey, everyone. Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us, Mac. So this is a fun one. Normally, we interview Canadian disc golfers. We are a Canadian disc golf podcast, and you are in Mobile, Alabama. And the reason why we wanted to talk to you today was because a couple of months ago, we'd had a debate about the flight of discs. And we talk a lot about disc flight numbers and flight ratings and things like that. And well, why don't you let us know what's your background in the science of Frisbee flight?
Yeah, so I am by trade a mechanical / aerospace engineer. Technically, my degree is in mechanical engineering, but I have a concentration in aerospace. All of my research was aerospace related. And my master's thesis was actually on disc flight characteristics and flight classification. So I did some CFD work, complex fluid dynamics, as well as some like field testing and trying to do some instrumentation stuff, kind of similar to like tech disc. So I've kind of been all around the realm of disc science, if you want to call it that. And yeah, I've got plenty of opinions and maybe some insider info, I guess. Insider info to the vast majority of disc golfers, I think.
Awesome. Well, we've got a ton of questions, but why don't you just give us a quick heads up on your disc golf journey? I see in PDGA page it goes back a few years, so and you got pretty good pretty quick. So why don't we start with how did you get into disc golf, and was your interest in rotating wings? Did that come before or after playing disc golf?
Yeah, so I got into disc golf actually when I was pretty young. My older brother JT got me into it when I was probably 8 to 10, playing pretty casually, doing some like weekly doubles tosses type of thing. And I played baseball and golf at the same time. So once I got into high school, and like middle school, and I kind of dropped the disc golf and pursued that, and eventually pursued baseball in high school. But once I got to college, I was done with both of those. But I'm just a competitive person in general. And, being a poor college kid, I was like, well, I need something to do. And, we had a campus course. So I said, I'm going to pick up disc golf, just as a hobby, walk around outside. It gives me something to do. I found I really liked it. And, it helps that I had already been into it as a kid. So I had like some very basics down. So that was pretty casual for a while. And, then I was like, oh, I think I want to do some competitive stuff. So I think different than most people, I started pretty high in the amateur divisions. I started in MA1 and pretty quickly, I think within 6 months, ended up moving to MPO. Whether or not that was too early of a time to move up, that's to be discussed. But I had gotten a couple of MA1 wins, so I went up to MPO, and yeah, since then it's just been a grind to get better. I've played one Silver Series event. I'm trying to play some more actual tour events. I'm actually going to the Capital of Texas Open next week in Austin, so that's a Q Series event. So yeah, we're grinding it out. We're trying to get there. And I guess the answer to your question of whether or not I was interested in rotating wings, no, I was not interested in rotating wings beforehand. The engineering and the disc golf kind of just collided together by happenstance. I was always good at math science, so I went into engineering. I originally wanted to do like prosthetics, so like a biomedical thing, but then, chemistry, not my favorite. So I ended up going aerospace, and yeah, just saw the opportunity to kind of mix the two, and here we are.
Awesome. Matt mentioned that your rating is pretty high up there. It's funny. My initial thought was for someone who's studying these discs, shouldn't his high be a lot higher? But
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just the disc that the flight of the disc that comes into play with your rating and everything. But did you? I guess my main question is: did you notice a jump when you started actually studying flights of disc? Did you notice a jump in your rating or your skill level because of it?
So not like a rating or not a skill jump because of my studies, I guess. I had a pretty good idea of all of the points that I validated in my research already, just from kind of experience with the discs. But I do definitely think that understanding disc flight, I think better than most, helps me a lot, especially in like shot shape decisions and disc selection. But like you said, it's not all just knowing, right? If I told, if I got a random physicist to come out here and he understood discs perfectly, he's still not going to be a 1020 rated player, right? Because he doesn't have the mechanics background to actually do the things he wants to do. So it's a big mix of knowledge and form and mental game. And, most of it's consistency. So it's just trying to be more consistent and stay locked in on the course during tournaments. But we're getting there. We've had some pretty good success here recently.
If we're going around the horn, then I get a question now. I'm excited because this is some of my favorite stuff to talk about. But I guess we'll probably start easing into some more physics-related stuff. And I kind of want to tag onto Andre's. was there an aha moment from the research that affected your game whatsoever? Like you said, you validated the points you kind of all already had made, and from years of playing disc golf, I'm sure you had been doing research unknowingly for most of your, playing career.
Mm-hmm.
But was there something like, this guy turns too much, this one never turns, this happens in wind or something that went and really clicked as part of that research? Was there any mysteries left by the end of it?
There's definitely still some mysteries, for sure, but I don't know if it's necessarily aha, but it's more of like, I understand this a lot better now. So the biggest one for me, I believe, was actually seeing why discs will finish to the left or right based on their rotation. And so like in my CFD models, you can see that there's areas of like lower pressure offset to the left or right based on the rotation of the disc. So that's due to a phenomenon called the Magnus Effect, which essentially is the same reason that like a baseball will curve different directions when you put different rotations on it. It's basically changing the momentum of the air particles around the object, whatever's moving through the fluid. And so the same thing happens in disc golf. That's why a righty backhand finishes to the left and a righty forehand finishes to the right. You're spinning them the opposite directions. So seeing stuff like that really helped, as well as the CFD was actually pretty awesome to like visualize what's happening. And everyone thinks for putters specifically, it's like, oh, they're blunter noses, so they're gonna have more drag, that sort of thing. But the drag actually comes from a large part wingtip vortices. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with those, but it's essentially areas of turbulent air that come off of the tips of airplane wings, is where it originated from. But it applies to discs as well, and it induces a lot of drag on the object. And so when you look at airflow models of discs, you'll see it kind of looks like a half pipe coming behind the disc. So it's the airflow being directed down off of the back of the disc, but the sides of the discs are creating these wingtips. And so it kind of makes this little half pipe motion, and they kind of curl up here at the top. And those curls are a lot bigger with the wider rimmed, or not wider rimmed, but the taller discs and the more blunt nosed discs. So I think just stuff like that. I'm very visual as a person. So being able to visualize that sort of stuff was super helpful to me. And I think it helps me make decisions on the course, like especially with wind direction, and stabilities based on temperature or elevation or however you want to call it.
Everyone's looking. Okay, let's go. So I love this part of it. And since we're talking about the wing of the disc, maybe we can focus on that a little bit, because as far as I know from my own reading, there's a lot of factors. Specifically, I'd love to talk about the bottom edge of the wing, because overstable discs typically have a more concave shape, and less stable discs typically tend to round that off at the bottom. The best one, if we could get a graphic to show this, is the difference between like the Eagle X and the Eagle L mold. The L mold is much more stable. It's a much sharper scoop. The L mold is rounded off. As far as I understand that's for deflecting air away from the underside of the disc, because there's a pocket of turbulent air that forms underneath the flight plate, and I believe that has something to do with the glide. I'd love some clarity on that if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so I guess first we got to talk about glide. Right? Glide, in my opinion, doesn't make much sense as like a characteristic. So if you go and look at the so you guys would know Innova created flight numbers in like 2009. And if you go and look at the actual definitions they have of each flight characteristic on their website, it's not very scientific. It's not it's not super descriptive as to what exactly they're talking about. And you can kind of intuit it with like speed and like turn and fade, but glide, the definition is like it stays in the air longer. And so it's kind of, what does that mean? How does that translate to like a scientific perspective? And so that was one thing I talked about in my thesis. And what I proposed was that it's the lift to drag ratio. So lift being the upward force that's put on the disc from redirecting the airflow, and then drag being the opposing force horizontally from, the geometry of the disc. And so that ratio there, typically you want a higher lift to drag ratio because you want it to lift more than you're dragging. Otherwise, the disc's going to fall to the ground. And so I think glide, it typically has a lot to do with the lift to drag. So I guess, yeah, a disc that would create less lift would be less glide. It gets a little funky though, because glide in and of itself, I don't know if you guys know this, but glide only works within specific categories of disc speed. So like a 3-speed putter with 5 glide, or 3 glide is more accurate, doesn't correlate to a 10-speed disc with 5 glide, right? You can't compare them because they're entirely different classifications of disc. So glide's just really confusing to me. What was your question? It was about the underside of the disc.
Well, I'll say that in our own research that we did years ago, we found that glide became strictly a function of understability. Its desire to not come back down to the earth. And it's actually, like you said, it's kind of a hocus pocus stat to have because it is truly a function of that understability. But the question was the shape of the underside of that wing creating overstability or understability. The science behind it. Is it creating less turbulent air underneath, more turbulent air underneath, or how that function actually works at all?
Yeah, so you'd be talking about the lower camber of it. So the camber is the geometry, and you have upper camber, which would be the top, and the lower camber, which is the bottom. So you're right in that the more concave disc shapes are typically more stable. And the less stable ones, you will see either kind of a straight line or even a little bit of a convex shape. And so as to why it makes it more or less unstable, my guess would probably be a little bit of turbulent flow, like you said. But also it's just the way that it deflects the air. So understability and overstability actually has a lot to do with surface quality of the disc. So a lot of people say the reason that a disc becomes flippier whenever it gets beat up is because I've heard a bunch of things, but the one I hear a lot is that it actually like brings down the nose angle, like it deforms and does that, which that's probably true in some instances with like base plastic discs. But more often what's happening, especially with like premium plastic discs, is the surface is getting scratched up. And so what happens is you get all of these imperfections on the disc, and it increases what's called the boundary layer. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but essentially what happens when a object moves through a fluid is you have all of these particles in the fluid, right? And they don't all just move over the surface of the fluid freely, right? Or the surface of the object freely. The object still has a friction function to it. And so some amount of the particles get stuck to the top of the disc, and they create this little tiny layer where the rest of the fluid particles can move over that. But that little tiny layer can also affect the entire airflow, so it can like induce drag, for instance. And so when you build up a larger layer, you're inducing more drag. You're now having more air particles affecting the actual surface of the object. And so when you get all these nicks and scratches, you're building up a larger boundary layer. And so now you're having more air particles affecting it, and more air particles is going to be more of a reason for the disc to be understable. And that kind of checks out with like higher elevation versus lower elevation, right? So higher elevation, you have a lower air density. So there's less particles inherently for the disc to be affected by. Versus a lower stability like sea level, you have more. Discs are typically going to flip more at sea level versus if you're playing in Colorado or in the mountains or something, right? That's like when we saw Worlds at Utah. everyone was having to really change their shot decisions because it's higher elevation, and now your flippy discs are now kind of your stable bombers. But I guess in terms of the lower camber, sorry, we're getting off on a lot of tangents
Well,
here.
I got more for that too. So
There's so much to talk about. But in terms of like the lower camber we were talking about, I don't know specifically why that works physics wise. It could be a lot of things. I have theories, like I said, but I can't give you this is the reason why this happens.
well, I've got one about the damage to the disc because we also did some thinking on that, and
Okay.
we had what we thought was like a disc golfer's aha moment, and you can totally debunk it and ruin it for us.
You're good.
We saw that the damage of the disc, now that you said, causes more air particles to be disturbed. We simplify it to disc golf terms and said that that's probably creating a similar phenomenon to throwing with a little bit of off-axis torque vibration on the wing, probably causing a similar effect. And so that a damaged disc was effectively flying the same as a disc that was thrown with off-axis torque. And if that same effect happens when you have that off-axis torque, you could maybe confirm our moment and we could pretend we're smart for a second.
I mean, that could definitely happen, right? So that's the thing, is there's no one thing. There's so many things happening when a disc gets beat up that, it's hard to point to one specifically. Disc deformation, so like the actual changing of the geometry, could definitely be one factor, and I'm sure it is. The kind of double-edged sword there is that it could also change it to be more stable, right? So it wouldn't always just change it to be less stable. That doesn't make any sense. But yeah, a deformed disc could give you some more wobble. As to whether or not that's going to be more stable or less stable, unknown. I guess it depends how it wobbles, right? That's kind of the thing with, it's called flutter in aerodynamics terms. It's a little bit unpredictable. That's why we try and not have it, right? So there's a lot of videos. At a sidetrack, there's a lot of videos if you look up air flutter of like these really long airplane wings, and they just start going crazy, and they kind of hit like this almost resonant frequency thing. And yeah, it's not good for planes, so it's also not good for discs. Luckily, we're supposed to hit the grounds. But yeah, I guess to kind of validate you, that definitely could have something to do with it. I'm not gonna say that that's wrong.
That tracks because like a lot of people's forehands have less rotation and a little bit more off-axis torque, and so those discs fly more understable as well. So I could see that. Getting back to what we were just talking about, because this was the debate that got us wanting to bring on an engineer in the first place. Cold weather. So we have anecdotally noticed that our discs don't fly as far in the winter, and they seem to fly more overstable. And we were confused as to whether that was a function of the air and the temperature, or just, in the winter we're not in as good disc golf shape, or the footing is not as good, so we're not getting as good a run up, or as good a plant, so we're just not throwing it quite as far. What would you give us the answer, the ultimate answer here? Why is it? Are we just not throwing it as well in the winter, or is the air actually making these discs more overstable and fly less far in the winter?
Yeah. Okay. So ultimate answer is, drumroll, it depends. Yeah. So
It's a real sciencey
a lot
answer.
a lot of people will note that it is kind of a debate of like whether they fly more or less stable, and a lot of it is due to you're cold, and athletically we just don't perform as well when our bodies are cold. And so you could just not be putting the same amount of rotations or disc speed behind it, or like you said, bad surface quality on the tee pads, whatever it is. But let's assume that we're throwing the exact same, right? We just walked into like a controlled indoor facility that has the air artificially colder, right? Given that, the discs should fly less stable in the cold. And the reason for that is cold air is denser than warm air. And so if we go back to our like 6th grade science class, we'll remember that like the difference between water and ice, it's inherently the same thing, but the actual molecules are being spread further apart versus close together. So ice is just the same molecules, it's just really dense, right? And that's because it's cold. It's the same with air. So colder air is going to have more molecules closely packed together. And more molecules closely packed together means more molecules affecting the actual disk itself. So what we can also attribute this to is headwinds versus tailwinds, right? So if we think of a disk with no wind at all, right? We're going to have, that's our baseline amount of particles hitting the disk, right? Let's say we throw it 60 miles an hour. Okay, now we throw the disk into a 20 mile an hour tailwind. All right, we'll go more reasonable. We'll say 10 mile an hour tailwinds. All right, what would the relative airspeed be there? Any guesses? So like the relative speed of how much air is flowing over the disk.
Well, it would be
The disc would see you were throwing it at 50 instead
Exactly.
of 60.
Exactly, right. And so what's happening is we have less air particles going over the disk than we would in static conditions. And we can do the opposite, right, with the 10 mile an hour headwinds, where now we're flowing more air particles over the disk. So the disk is effectively seeing us throwing it 70 miles an hour in terms of the amount of air particles that are going over it. And so what do we see when we throw disks into headwinds? We see that they flip more, right? And that's because we have more air particles going over the surface of the disk. So it checks out that if we throw it in colder conditions with more air particles, we're going to see disks flip more.
so it is
Okay.
because I'm cold.
Yeah. Cold,
Most likely.
less grip on the tee pads, worse run ups. And
Yeah.
who knows, maybe if the disc is at minus 30 versus, room temperature, probably there's some different characteristics in the plastic as well, right? So there could be a
Yeah.
lot of factors that are making us throw less far and more
Yeah,
overstable.
absolutely. I mean, there's so many factors that go into how a disc flies, whether it's the stiffness or the hardness of the plastic or the surface quality. You could have one disc that flies stable in normal like weather conditions, but then you leave it in your car for an hour and it gets really hot and you go throw it and now it's a roller, right? So there's so many things. It's really hard, and this is something that I kind of tackled. It's really hard to control for one aspect in these things, and so kind of bringing it back to the reason that I think you hit me up in the first place was that Stuff Made Here video. And so that's why something like that you could control the disk speed and the disk rotation. I mean, that would be huge for researching disks, right? There's no like object out there right now or mechanism to control those things. And all I have is myself. And I'm a human. I'm imperfect. I'm never going to throw two things the exact same. So yeah, it's just hard.
That's half the fun of disc golf. What is the state of scholarship? Like as a layman using Google, it was not easy to find a ton of good quality scholarship on golf discs specifically. Like there's a lot about wing shapes and there's a lot of scholarship about, gyroscopic motion, but it doesn't seem to be a super popular area for academics. What was your research like when you were doing your thesis, and did you have to do a lot of this stuff yourself? And what would you say the state of academic knowledge about disc flight is?
Man, next to non-existent. There's really not much many scholarly articles out there regarding disc golf specifically. We kind of talked about it a little bit before the show, but discs are essentially frisbees mixed with airfoils. And so there's a lot of scholarly articles on frisbees. There's a lot of scholarly articles on airfoils. Not many at all with them mixed together, right? So it's actually a pretty novel problem. Kind of flew under the radar. And so, kind of as a backstory for me, I I worked on satellites, for instance, in my like research. And when it came time to pick my master's thesis topic, that was going to be just like the default, like, hey, you can just do what you're already doing, and just do like this specific part. And I was like, okay, whatever. And then randomly, my professor was like, unless you have something else you want to do, I said, you know, I do this disc golf thing, and he played disc golf a little bit, and I kind of pitched him the idea of it, and he was like, "Yeah, sounds great." He's like, "Go for it." And so that was a huge green flag for me, and that led to, okay, let's see what's already out there. And I have the same Google you do. There's nothing. There's like maybe I could pull together 10, maybe, if I spent a couple days looking for it really hard. And so a lot of my thesis in particular was just kind of validating typical disc golf claims, right? Because there wasn't even that, the whole like wider rim discs equate to needing more arm speed, right? To make them go farther or to adhere to their disc qualifications. Like there wasn't even that out there. So a pretty large portion of my thesis was just, hey, I'm going to take these things that every disc golfer knows just by playing, and I'm going to put like a scientific backing to it and give you actual empirical data as to why this works. Yeah, so no, the scholarly disc golf community is approximately me and 3 other people that I don't know.
I'd like to talk about that effect, actually. That's another thing. The wider rim disc going farther scenario, because that is a function of the gyroscope effect, right? Gyroscopic stability. The idea that the weight at the edge of the disc should make it continue to spin for longer before slowing down once it's gotten up to that speed. And also kind of the basis of MVP's claim that the gyro technology works. Instead of just putting more mass of the same density there, they put a higher density one to try and make the rim smaller but achieve the same effect. I'm assuming that came out to be correct in your research.
Yeah, so I didn't look specifically at like the MVP claim. But in terms of increased gyroscopic stability from wider rim discs, I mean, I don't doubt that's true. If you're asking why they go farther, sure, I think stability has something to do with it, right? Stability keeping it in the air longer. But at the same time, what's happening is you're making the rim sharper, and so you're inducing less drag doing that. And so if you have less of that opposing force that's going to bring the disc to the ground, then it's obviously going to stay in the air longer. But something about, and this is more just an observation rather than like I have a formula that proves this, but something about the disc rim being wider makes it so that you need to give it more rotations and disc speed in order for it to reach its peak stability, if that makes sense. So that claim was validated. As to exactly why that happens, honestly, I could not tell you at this very moment. But I guess to speak on the MVP stuff, I'm not besmirching MVP at all, right? But I actually have not concerned. I'm a little bit hesitant to agree or like buy into the claim, because as far as I know, they're increasing the density of the plastic on the outer rims, but they're doing it uniformly, right? So the disc is still, it's all symmetric. So the disc still has the same center of mass. So in terms of how it's rotating around its rotation point being its center of mass, I don't see how it would be super different, right? Because if you're saying, well, it's almost going to be like you're creating a bigger moment because there's more weight at the end. At the same time, there's that same amount of weight on the other end, kind of working in the other way. So again, it's just something I haven't looked into, but I would need to see some, let's say, data or some better research on it, because kind of looking just haphazardly on Google Scholar, I did not find much that was talking about that.
So you're gonna do your doctorate on is MVP a hoax?
I've had people ask me if I'm going to get my PhD, and the potential of getting the title Dr. Disc Golf is very appealing. I will say that.
So anecdotally, I've noticed that the weight distribution of like flight plate versus rim, it affects the stability for sure, because we've had chats about lightweight discs and noticed that like the discs that are made lightweight by having like bubbles in the rim, for instance, are much less stable than their counterparts. But then some manufacturers have lightweight discs where the weight is uniformly distributed, like with the heavier weight discs, and they tend to be more stable. So, but I've never noticed a difference in distance like MVP would claim.
So that's I mean, again, that's one of those, there's so many factors, right? So you're saying that the lightweight discs seem to be less stable, but that could also just be that they're lighter weight, right? So my buddy actually got one of the Z-Lite Venoms the other day. I threw it. It's more stable than any Venom I've thrown, right? Like, they are absolute beefcakes. And they have the same deal where it's kind of the bubbles in the rim. And if you talk about the what are they called? They're the old like Blizzard destroyers that they used to throw for the Japan Open. And those things were absolute beefcakes. They're like 150 grams, so again, it really depends. I know it's not a scientific answer, but a lot of it could be, surface quality, or the amount of dome that the disc has, or, this, that, and the other thing.
I'm going to throw
But
a
if it does,
out.
okay, go ahead.
Because we were just talking about the gyroscope part, and I have more questions about it. You would think that if that claim is correct about there being more mass at that moment, if those bubbles are in the rim, you're getting less mass involved at that moment, which should, in essence, give it less momentum in its spin over time. And what we think we learned, and you can myth bust this too, is that high rates of spin should stabilize the disc, whether it's understable or not. So the relationship between being able to get that lightweight disc up to that spinning time is going to make it fly more stable until it starts to slow down in spin, not in velocity. That same should be the opposite. With more weight on the outside, it should continue to stabilize itself, fly straighter for longer before falling into those other characteristics from running out of spin.
Yeah, no, I could see that for sure.
So I guess the effect on an overstable disc with lightweight is that it would fall into its overstable tendency sooner because it would stop holding that spin. So you got your beefcake Venom, or am I talking crazy?
Right. I guess the double-edged sword there is you're putting more weight on the rim, right? But having more weight on the rim is also going to make it so that it's harder for you to get rotations on the disc, right? So you're not going to be able to get the disc up to its rotational velocity that you would with a lighter weight rim. So a lighter weight disc, you could potentially get more rotations on, but let's say it in having lighter weight has like you decrease your rotational velocity faster. Which one of those phenomena is going to beat out the other, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's totally possible that the MVP claim is correct. As to how much that, I think I've heard the 10% farther thing or whatever, but as to how much that actually affects it, not entirely sure. But I will say a disc that does keep its gyroscopic stability longer will fly farther, right? Given perfect disc flight, for instance. Obviously, if you turn and burn it into the ground, it doesn't matter how stable the disc
For
is.
sure. Yeah, we got a bunch of
Well, they-
hypotheticals where if you threw the flippiest disc you own with the maximum possible spin rate, you could make it fly dead straight forever or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Simon said a while ago that MVP is working on a disc launching robot. So now there's at least 2 in the wild.
That's awesome.
I think we'll find out pretty soon whether they can back it up or not. So I think that's going to be exciting. Like if I'm MVP, why would you not reach out to either of those YouTube channels that recently made disc flying robots and be like, okay, we'll buy it. Let's go.
Yeah, maybe they have. We need to see the like pro versus robot. I don't know if you've ever seen the bowling videos where they have the bowling machine and they'll take like Jason Belmont, who's like the best bowler in the world, and they'll make them go one-on-one against each other. We need to see that with Simon versus a robot.
Yeah, because Simon can seemingly throw at a speed on demand.
Yeah, no, he's definitely one of the best in the world about not only getting the disc to those crazy speeds, but being able to control it.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how that works. So you did your thesis on flight numbers, and we talked about it a little bit. Did you come up with an alternative set of flight numbers? Do you think in terms of just like the layman's understanding of how your disc is going to fly, the Innova flight number system is good? Did you come across any other like legacy flight number systems? Like Discraft used to have a different system. Vibram used to have, I don't even understand Vibram's system. It was like 744 to 28 or something like that.
Yeah.
would be on a disc. Did you come up with like your ideal flight numbering system to A, describe the flight of a disc, but B, to better describe what disc golfer would get when they bought a new disc?
So I did a little bit of that. So the the problem is the flight numbers were just this thing that Innova created for like their own customers, and then for whatever reason the disc golf community really latched onto it, and now it's like the gold standard for all disc golf manufacturers, and it's kind of an inherently flawed system, right? So one, we described that it's not scientific in its definitions, like really at all, but two, how are we coming up with these flight numbers? Right, and the dirty little secret, if in case y'all don't know, is they just make them up. So they give them to a team of pros that test it out, and they essentially just ask them what they think the flight numbers are. And yeah, this is something that really surprised me because I reached out to Innova and asked them like how they get them, and that's just what they told me. And that was kind of like a jaw drop moment. It's like, oh, this is kind of just based in nothing. But it makes sense, right? Because if you've thrown a bunch of different manufacturers, specifically with like turn and fade, you're going to see these are not the same at all. So like an Innova versus say a West Side. West Side is pretty historically more on the flippy side for their numbers. So like a King is a really good example. I think it's like a negative 1.5, flies like a negative 3 in Innova or something. Like I would attribute it to almost like a strike flippiness. So they're not consistent between manufacturers. They're not even really consistent between the same manufacturer. It's fully dependent on what type of plastic, what run we're doing. So to have one set of flight numbers for one disc mold, I think is not the best strategy. There should be a way to kind of, this is maybe the base flight numbers, and then this is like a modifier based on this run that we've observed or this plastic that it's in, right? So whatever that looks like. In terms of my thesis, though, I did propose a couple of things. So if I were to rank all of the flight numbers, right, in terms of most useful to least useful, right, top would be speed. Speed is actually pretty good, and it's actually based in some reality, like scientific reality, which is just the width of the rim. that's great. We can measure it. It's awesome. And then you've got like turn and fade kind of right there with each other. Turn's maybe a little more useful, but it's also less consistent. But those are generally going to be about right just because we can observe it and see. And they're very generally tell you the right way that a disc is going to fly. And then you got glide, and I hate glide. We've talked about it. It's not, it doesn't mean anything to me. So for speed, the only thing that I saw was what I did was I actually went and measured the rims of the disc and then kind of graphed them and put them onto a plot and saw that, okay, these are not lining up very well. So I basically just trend fit it and said, all right, just propose this formula. Let's just say you put the rim width into this formula and then give it a plus or minus, like a margin, and then it's an 8 or a 9 speed, right? So it could be something as simple as that, just kind of standardizing it between manufacturers. But then you get to like turn and fade, and it gets a lot more complicated because the question becomes, how do you quantify turn and fade from like a scientific perspective, right? And how do you do that in a controlled environment and take out all the extra factors? The only way I can think of is a wind tunnel, and honestly, there's not much data on how you view how it redirects the airflow to how much the disc is going to turn in the air. It doesn't. That's just not out there. That's not research that I found, at least. Maybe there's something better in terms of like frisbees, but I don't know the answer to that. It's tough, right? Because the system itself is good in that you should have a way to know what the disc is going to fly like before you buy it. Like I like the idea, but the execution, not it for me. My biggest pet peeve I wanted to say was with turn. There are some manufacturers, cough cough, Discraft, that will give a disc a positive turn. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. Either it turns or it doesn't. It can't anti-turn. So I think like the Captain's Raptor is like a something 1, 4, or 5 or whatever. And it's like, that doesn't make sense definitionally to me, that it would have a positive. If you want to set this standard that turn is a negative number just so it's more intuitive, fine. But it can't go the other way. Then that's just fade.
Did Innova give you any idea how they came up with like 0 to probably 7 when they came up with the flight numbers for speed?
For
0 to, or probably I guess like 1 to 7 for glide, like +1 to -5 for like. Did they give you any idea why these ranges are so weird and random?
No, they did not. I think they just kind of wanted to categorize them, and if it were me doing it, I would want to categorize them with enough variability that, okay, I can tell that a -2 and a -1 are going to be significantly different. But when you can't have like a -0 or -1 to -50, right? Because then if you have a -32 and a -31, how different is that really going to look? So it is a little bit of a, customer appeal scenario where it's like, we don't want to confuse them too much, which is crazy that I'm defending flight numbers for not confusing people. But yeah, we don't want to confuse them too much, but we want to give them enough of a range so that they know there is a difference and they are going to fly significantly different. Now, you could argue that there needs to be more separation between them, right? So like NVP, for instance, is one that does it a lot when they do the half numbers. So maybe that's an instance where instead of going negative or 0 to 5 or whatever on turn, we need to go 0 to 10. So I think it's an imperfect system. I think you could definitely change it. Whether or not they're going to anytime soon, I'm not sure, because that's gonna rock a lot of people's worlds if they start seeing a 10 on turn or whatever, a -10.
I think the only way it changes if it somehow becomes a PDGA certification requirement where the PDGA certifies all the numbers as well. I think that's the only way that you can sort of enforce that, because like you said, it is just kind of like feel. It's funny because I compare it to rock climbing a lot, because when when you're rock climbing or you're doing a bouldering problem, especially in like a gym or something, it's just a bunch of people climbing it and being like, this feels like this. There's no like accurate measurement or anything like that. It just kind of like, it's based on how it feels. And so disc golf is very similar in that sense. So, yeah.
And I don't know a ton about rock climbing, but I know some terms, right? So like crimp, that's one, right?
Yeah.
That's a term. So like a certain crimp might be harder for someone than another person. And so, like one move might be really tough for one person, whereas it's like, my wingspan is 6 inches longer than yours. This is totally this is not a big deal for me. And so, but I think that makes more sense because those routes are very subjective. We're not talking about like an objective reality, which is the disc flies this way when you throw it this fast.
Totally.
And that's what flight numbers are supposed to be. And so it doesn't make sense to make flight numbers subjective.
I think
I do like your comparison.
You hire one person and then they just set all the flight numbers for every manufacturer.
I want to be the PDGA flight numbers guy. Let me throw every disc ever made, and I'm going to have my own system.
Yeah.
It's going to be great.
Yeah. Why is this one super overstable? It's not like that at all. Oh, my arm was sore that day.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, realistically, that's not a realistic thing to say, but that is a better system than what we do now,
totally.
Which is we hand it to 20 different people who don't throw the same and ask them what they think it is.
Yeah,
and
I think, it's pretty clear that Innova tests a lot of their discs around California near sea level. And then I think the reason why like Westside and Latitude discs are so much flippier is I think they test them at like 600-700 meters of elevation instead. And their -1 there is probably the same as the Innova -1 in California, but like that's not how it works in the real world. So that's how you come up with all these different numbers.
Exactly. They're not even testing it in the same place. Like you said, Innova's in California, Discraft's in Michigan, Prodigy's in Georgia. Like these are not the same elevation or temperatures, right? We already discussed how temperatures affect things. So it's just, it doesn't make sense. And it's all based on your subjective interpretation of what flight numbers should be. Like what I think a -1 should fly like is probably not exactly the same as what you guys think a -1 should fly like. So
yeah. What's your understanding? So we've had some, I think we can call them dubious claims about physics from all these manufacturers. MVP says their gyroscope effect, they go 10% further. We've had Luft discs out of Denmark with a curved rim on their borium on the underside of their rim. We've had Latitude came out with Speed 15 discs that had like a pebbled top, like trying to get that golf ball effect. What's your understanding of the level of scientific work that goes in at all these manufacturers when they're doing disc design and disc research? Is anybody doing any kind of CFD work, or is this all like Jim had an idea and we made a mold and thought we'd try it out and then we threw it and gave it some flight numbers? Like, do you know anybody that's doing actual like science before designing these discs?
It's the only one I know for certain, and you're probably not going to be able to guess it, but it's the Trash Panda guys, the Intercore. What is their? I forget their company name.
I think
it might be Trash Pandas. It is Trash Pandas. Okay, yeah, I've actually talked to
Jesse.
His name escapes me. Yeah, Jesse. I've talked to Jesse over Instagram DMs like once or twice, and he told me that he has like a team of a couple guys that are doing CFD for him. So I do know that he's doing it. And it would not surprise me if manufacturers are doing CFD, but it also wouldn't surprise me if Innova's just like, I'm gonna stick to the tried and true method of I'm just gonna make a disc and tell you and see if it works the way I think it's going to. Right? Because that's how discs started. It was Dave Dunapace just basically soldering, ironing a bunch of different frisbees together and saying, "Oh, these fly farther." Right? So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right? But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if, I think you told me that the lift guys are doing CFD. I'm sure they are. And specifically, I think
They
it's
make drawings that look like CFD analysis, but I'm not convinced that it actually is. I feel like it's just somebody took some arrows like in Microsoft Paint and and like drew vectors.
that could also be true. But I'll say in terms of, so I think, what is their mold? The Boreum, right? So the big thing with that one being the underside of the rim is curved or beveled versus kind of just like that straight sharp line that we typically see. I'll say that as an idea, I think works. Like, theoretically in my head, that makes sense to the claims that they're making, that that it's going to glide farther, whatever, right? So having that beveled edge is going to let the air flow off of it easier versus that straight line, that very like abrupt change is going to induce more drag. So if you're inducing less drag, then it makes sense that the disc is going to stay in the air longer, right? Now, the double-edged sword that I keep talking about is, how much harder is it to get a disc up to speed when you don't have that sharp edge versus you have the rounded edge, right? The problem with a lot of disc manufacturing as to why we can't make the perfect disc mold is we also have to design them so that they fit in the human hand, right? So that's the whole deal with beads, is some people like them because they fit into this little crease better. And it's a comfort thing, but what I actually found when I was doing my CFD was it does make a small difference. Whether or not it translates significantly on the course, what you could see was I had like a rock 3 was one of the discs that I molded, or that I modeled on there. And you can see in the CFD models that it was creating small streaks of like turbulent air underneath the disc, whereas discs that didn't have a bead weren't doing that. And so even these super small changes are affecting the disc, but we're doing it for comfort standpoints. So you can have an optimal disc shape, but if it doesn't fit into a human hand, like, it's obviously not going to go as far because we can't throw it. We can't get it to where it needs to be.
Cool. I
Don't
have
look at
anything
me.
else.
That Red Bull gives you something, and it's not wings. So I missed a little bit of this chat.
So I sent you a paper that was done by a fellow named Immonen in Finland, and this was one of the most interesting things I found when I was doing research on this topic. He came up with optimal disc shapes for both accuracy for a putter and distance on a driver. And I don't know if we'll be able to. Maybe we'll just put a link in the show notes about this because there's a lot going on here. But he used CFD analysis and I think computer learning to go through generations of different disc shapes. And what he came up, and within the guidance of the PDGA rulebook as well. So theoretically, these are discs that somebody could make and get through the PDGA approval process. And what he came up with was, for PDGA legal discs, a driver to maximize the lift to drag and theoretically get the most distance. Really, really thin flight plate, right? Like probably nearly impossible to mold thin flight plate, and like weird curved rim, that like the borium, but to the extreme. What do you
Right.
think about this paper? Do you think there's some validity? Do you think this might eventually drive some more disc innovation, or is this just like a fun thought experiment that will never really see the light of day in the real world?
I mean, I think it's valid for sure. I think that they, I did read pretty much all of it. The optimization methods he went through kind of went over my head. I'm not familiar with them, but I'm just gonna assume that he did them right for the sake of it. And he did use some like AI kind of machine learning for it, and I think it's really cool. Whether or not this would ever get manufactured, I don't know, but I think some of the principles could definitely be used. But for instance, I'm looking at, if you have it pulled up, I'm looking at figure 8, and he has, I guess this is for the driver. He has a minimum CD, so that's the drag coefficient disc profile. So that one, I liked the way that he did it, where he basically set parameters and he said, make the shape that produces the least amount of drag possible, right? And then next to it, he maximized the lift. And so if you look at lift, there's no lip on that whatsoever, right? So you're never going to be able, like, I don't even like throwing ultra stars. They feel weird to me. So having this is like throwing a paper plate, right? We don't throw paper plates very far. But I think you could use this to see trends. And when it comes to optimizing a disc shape, you could use like kind of these principles that are being shown and I guess innovate that way. My personal opinion, though, is that the next quote unquote disc golf innovation is probably going to be in plastic. If nothing else, I've seen some stuff out there about like regenerative plastic polymers and whatnot. So, you scratch your disc on the course, let it sit around for 24 hours, and that scratch might not be there. That sort of thing. So,
Crazy.
yeah. I think plastic technology is probably going to be the next innovation, but that's not to say that these shape optimizations couldn't be it as well.
Cool.
I was at a disc golf store in Portland. I love telling this story. Just shopping around for discs with a couple of my friends, and we overheard this conversation with these old heads. And one of them was saying, well, nobody's actually ever made a disc that flies farther than the Valkyrie. These flight numbers are just bogus marketing. That's still going to be the furthest flying disc ever made.
That's crazy.
Didn't Sandstrom
So-
get the world record with that Valkyrie?
Yeah, he threw 1,100 feet with the DX Valkyrie. That's what I heard.
That was the record holding disc before the boss.
Before
with
the
Wiggins.
boss, for sure.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about now.
No. Maybe like, when would that record have been made? Early mid 2000s, and there was like signature world record distance Valks out in the wild.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense.
Nobody's using them now, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's like saying the Eagle is the farthest flying disc, because when the first disc was made, it flew farther than all the Ultra Stars.
It went far enough for Climo, so
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
good enough for me. He was pretty good.
Yeah. Shoot, if we're talking about Climo, the farthest flying disc probably like a Cobra or something.
Yeah.
I do remember seeing his like last in the bag he did. And it was like, I'm testing out this new one. These destroyers are too much for me. I like my Pro Wraith because it goes far. And I think he was testing like a turn or something. TERN, turn. I remember the Climo voice. And they look real good for him now.
Yeah.
It's hard being old.
There's something to say about like the kind of way that disc golf is positioned right now, where it's almost like I attribute it to golf, where we have club fittings. And say you get a 9-iron, and for the way your swing acts, you might need to pitch it up or down a couple of degrees, that sort of thing. It's kind of the same with disc molds, where, I mean, pretty much all distance drivers, for instance, are valid, right? But it's about how that reacts with the way that you throw the disc. So, for instance, shameless plug to my sponsor, but the Emperors are like my go-to distance driver. I've just found that they work the best for how I release the disc, and I get the best results there. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to come over here and say like, nah, man, destroyers suck, right? Like maybe destroyers are great for you, but and like I have a destroyer in my bag at the moment, but so maybe that's not the best the best choice. But like a strike, right? For me, a strike is too flippy. So, but someone else that might be perfect for him. It's all just dependent on the person. And I think disc golfers kind of like the whole the debate between companies where they might just basically be the same disc, right? There's a million Wraith clones out there, but
And I think that the Emperor might be an AJ destroyer.
I would not be surprised.
So do you think you would see, like, is this the future of a disc golf store? Is you got a tech disc set up with a net and somebody comes in and throws a bunch of backhands and forehands, and then you've got just like a chart of, because we've sent all these discs through a robot at different speeds and different RPMs, and you could say, okay, based on your throw, like this should be your max distance driver in this plastic, this should be your mid because it'll stay the straightest the longest. Like, do you think that could be the future of disc golf equipment selection?
I definitely think some amount of like quantifiable data, right? So it's similar to like club fittings. They'll go get your numbers on a TrackMan or something. I think that that's definitely the future for the higher end stores, whether or not that's with Tech Disc, or I've seen another company that has similar to TrackMan. They have like a radar setup basically. I don't know how sophisticated it is, but I would personally say a radar setup would be preferable to a Tech Disc. Not to besmirch Tech Disc at all, but in my opinion, the glaring problem with Tech Disc is that you have to buy an entire disc mold, right? And so what I have to have 4 Tech Discs to get my numbers on putters, mids, drivers, or fairway drivers and distance drivers, right? Like it would be preferable to me if I had one setup that I could throw any disc on, and maybe I throw some stickers on the top so that I have like tracking algorithms, and then that's it, instead of me buying a $200 or $300 whatever object with the hockey puck on the bottom. And I haven't messed with the Tech Disc, so I'm not trying to besmirch it. I know a lot of people like it, and I think having more data is probably better than less data. So I'm glad people are getting more into the actual scientific side of it. Like, okay, I create this many RPMs, for instance. The problem with that is like nothing else works off of RPMs. So how does that translate, right?
Yeah, I had a question based on that actually, because you're talking about flight numbers specifically, how they're generated, and this disc fitting scenario. Those flight numbers, as you know and said, are generated by a bunch of pros going out to the field in California, throwing it 10 times and coming back to telling Dave that it's a whatever.
Yeah.
The data that you don't have there is the speed that it's thrown at, and then the nose angle that it's thrown at. Because I was thinking about that in a fitting scenario. The nose up throw is a flaw in the throw. The data will be never taken off a very nose up throw. You can never really fit a nose up thrower with a disc that's going to turn if that angle is too aggressive.
Yeah.
So how do you make that stat uniform? Because it's probably the one that's going to affect that characteristic the most, right?
Yeah. So you would. So there's a couple ways, right? You would either have to have a system that's going to give you like a nose angle and also like off-axis torque, right? So you need to have a system that's going to give you those variables, and then maybe throw it 1,000 times and note what the disc does when it has these variables. That way you can kind of set trends to those variables, so that in any given instance I can say, okay, I threw this, everything looks great, but I have a 5-degree nose up angle. That's probably a little drastic, but it'd probably be more like 1.5, 2 degrees or something like that. But you say, I can tell you that's why this one was 20 feet shorter than the last one you threw. So you could do it that way. That's kind of like a brute force method. The other way would be setting up some sort of like set in stone algorithms for it. So, I plug in these variables, therefore the disk should go this far. And I think the tech disk has something like that, but
Yeah, there's a function. So it does measure things like wobble, they call it nose angle, launch angle, obviously RPM and speed, but it will model out flights of whatever disk that you want based on flight numbers, which, as we've discussed, is kind of an imperfect thing. But it will model out whatever disk you can hypothetically throw into it.
Okay, so their system works off of the flight numbers of the mold that they're using then. So I didn't know that. I was very curious as to how they were coming up with these flight simulations. So that's another thing, right? In terms of a flaw in the system where we're setting these simulated flights based off of subjective numbers. So it across the board needs to be more objective. And I think you either need to put in a lot of money into like maybe doing some wind tunnel testing, or you need to get up with one of these guys that are making disc launchers and find a really controlled environment and just shoot 1,000,000,000,000,000 discs out of it and see what it does. Because, part of my thesis was me just essentially doing field work, and I tried to get as many variables as I could. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen like Mythbusters or something, but the thing that they do a lot is they'll have like a board with white and black stripes behind it, and they're set at like certain intervals so that you can slow-mo video it and basically measure and get a disk speed based off of that, a disk in this instance. And so I did that. I had like a GoPro set up. I had a stopwatch. And so I got at least semi-accurate disk speeds based off of that. And then flight time numbers. And obviously I went and range found all of the disks. So I got those 3 variables, but that doesn't attribute to, like we talked about, nose up angle or disc wobble or, this, that, and the other thing. So it's just finding a way to isolate the variables that we want to research. And that's really hard because the disc golf problem is a lot more complicated than people may initially think it is.
Yeah. Well, we've hopefully made it a little bit simpler for everybody now after this awesome discussion. And we could have probably talked for another hour and a half.
I can talk all day about this stuff.
Yeah, I love it. I wish there was more scholarship in the field. I think you should become Dr. Disc Golf Mac. And if I was a disc manufacturer, I would be hiring somebody like you because I think there's room to make significant advances in R&D in the disc golf world, aside from making a disc and giving it to Dave Dunapace to chuck in a field for a couple of days. So
if any disc manufacturers are looking to hire, my DMs are open.
Yeah. So Matt Givens _DG on Instagram. People can find you on Facebook as well.
Yeah, so Mac Givens Disc Golf on Facebook, and then if you just type in Mac Givens on YouTube, it should take you to my channel. Those are my 3 mains, but majority I'm on Instagram, so that's the place to find me. I post semi-daily, try to do daily, but sometimes it doesn't work out.
Yeah, and you've already taken down a couple of C tiers this year. So what's the big tournament you're looking forward to this year?
I'm going to the Capital of Texas Open actually next week in Austin. So the Q Series event, I'm very excited for that. And then the week after, I'm actually coming straight back to Mobile, and then like 3 days later, leaving for Huntsville, Alabama for an A tier called Rocket City Blast. So excited about those. Those are the 2 big ones I have signed up right now. I'd like to get into some bigger tournaments. We'll kind of see where the wind takes me, but follow me on Instagram and keep up with it that way. That's going to be the best way to stay in touch with my disc golf journey.
Cool.
Definitely do that. Check them out. Mac, thank you so much for joining us and sharing some knowledge with us.
Yeah, thank you guys. I had a lot of fun. It was great meeting both of you, or all three of you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. That was a great episode. That was fun.
Oh, yeah. I like I said in the interview, when are we scheduling number 2? I'm ready to talk about more Frisbee stuff.
Yeah. If you have any questions, let us know. If you're still listening, let us know. And if there's anybody that you want to see on, if there's any topic you want us to discuss, let us know. If you want more disc nerd stuff, let us know. If you want to hear a materials expert talk about different plastic types, why is a C line type plastic different from a baseline type plastic? What are they made out of? Why does one fly differently? What are some different plastics coming down the pipe? I think there would be a huge opportunity to have an interview with a materials engineer.
My imagination runs wild when you have these science people on. Him, Mac, and a couple others tasked to make the ultimate golf disc. The guys that know how the flight, the guys that know the material, get all the best minds together, and wow, a roundtable podcast with some people like that in the room. I'm excited for what we can think of.
All right, we babbled along long enough. We'll have Andre back next week. That is a quote-unquote guarantee.
Yes.
From all of us here at Northern Flights Podcast, check your discs, make sure they're legal, and call your card mates, whether they're legal or not. And then blame Jesse.
I'm so sorry for releasing that into the world. Good night.
Bye.